The town of Dusty Creek, Texas, in the spring of 1889 was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business before they knew it themselves. With a population barely cresting 300 souls, gossip traveled faster than tumbleweeds in a dust storm. So when word got out that Jackson Monroe, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, had sent off for a mail-order bride, the entire town erupted in speculation. Women whispered behind their fans at church socials, men placed bets at the saloon, and the town's eligible bachelorettes mourned the loss of the territory's most sought-after bachelor. Jackson Monroe was a man who commanded respect without demanding it. At 34 years old, he stood 6 feet 3 inches of solid muscle earned from years of working his sprawling ranch, the Triple M, which stretched across 20,000 acres of prime Texas grassland. His dark hair always seemed just a touch too long, curling slightly at his collar, and his steel-gray eyes could assess the value of a horse or read a man's intentions with equal precision. He'd built his fortune from nothing, starting with a small herd and a dream, expanding through smart purchases and harder work than most men could endure. His ranch house was the finest in the region, a 2-story white structure with a wraparound porch and real glass windows. But despite his success and good looks, Jax had remained stubbornly unmarried. The reason, as he'd explained to his foreman Roberto one evening over whiskey, was simple enough. "I don't have time for courting, Rob. The ranch needs my attention 14 hours a day. And the women around here, well, they're fine ladies, but they expect things I can't give, dances and socials and attention I don't have to spare. I need a partner, someone practical who understands what ranch life really means." Roberto had raised an eyebrow. "And you think you'll find that in a mail-order bride? A woman desperate enough to marry a stranger?" "Not desperate," Jax had corrected. "Practical. Brave. A woman willing to take a chance on building something real. Besides, half the marriages around here started as arrangements anyway. At least this way, everyone knows what they're getting into from the start." So Jax had placed his advertisement in several eastern newspapers, describing himself honestly. A successful rancher seeking a wife who understood hard work, could manage a household, and wanted a life out west. He promised fair treatment, a comfortable home, and a partnership built on mutual respect. He didn't promise love, didn't offer flowery words or romantic notions. What he offered was security, honesty, and a chance at a good life. The responses had surprised him. More than 30 letters arrived over the following months, each from a woman with her own story, her own reasons for seeking a new life. Some were widows, some were fleeing difficult family situations, some simply wanted adventure. Jax read each letter carefully, finally settling on one from a Miss Eleanor Hartwell of Boston, Massachusetts. Her letter was different from the others, direct and intelligent, with a dry humor that made him smile. She was 26, educated, and working as a governess for a wealthy family. She wrote that she was tired of being treated as an educated servant, neither family nor staff, and wanted a life where she could build something of her own. She didn't pretend to know anything about ranching, but she promised to learn. She asked intelligent questions about the ranch, the town, and what would be expected of her. Something about her straightforward approach appealed to Jax's practical nature. They exchanged several more letters over the following months, each one revealing more about the other. Eleanor wrote about her love of books and her talent for managing complex households. Jax wrote about his daily life on the ranch, the challenges and rewards, the isolation and the satisfaction. They were, in their way, getting to know each other, building a foundation of understanding through ink and paper. Finally, Jax sent her the money for a train ticket and proposed marriage. Eleanor accepted with characteristic directness. "I believe we can make a successful partnership, Mr. Monroe. I will arrive on the 15th of May. The 15th of May fell on a Wednesday, and it seemed like half the town found reasons to be near the train station that afternoon. Mrs. Henderson from the general store suddenly needed to pick up a shipment that wasn't due for another week. Reverend Talbot decided that very afternoon was the perfect time to visit the station master about Sunday services. Young Timothy Blake, who worked at the livery, volunteered to deliver a message that could easily have waited. Even old Doc Morrison, who usually spent his afternoons napping on his porch, made the trek down to the station, claiming he wanted to stretch his legs. Jax arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, dressed in his finest suit, a dark gray affair that had cost him more than his first horse. He'd gotten a haircut, shaved carefully, and even polished his boots to a shine. Roberto accompanied him, both for moral support and because someone needed to drive the wagon with Eleanor's luggage. The foreman had never seen his boss so nervous. "You're sweating, amigo," Roberto observed with poorly concealed amusement. "I've seen you face down stampedes with less worry on your face." "A stampede, I understand," Jax muttered, tugging at his collar. "This is different. What if we don't suit in person? What if she takes one look at me and gets right back on that train?" "Then you're out the cost of a ticket and your pride," Roberto said pragmatically. "But something tells me that won't happen. Any woman brave enough to travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger has more grit than that." The train whistle sounded in the distance, a lonely wail that carried across the prairie. Everyone on the platform straightened, trying not to look too obvious in their curiosity. Jax felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a sensation he hadn't experienced since he'd fought off rustlers trying to steal his first herd. The train chugged into view, a massive iron beast trailing smoke and steam, and slowly ground to a halt with a screech of brakes and a hiss of pressure. The conductor stepped down first, placing a small stool for passengers to use. A few men disembarked, traveling salesmen by the look of their cases. Then came a family, a harried mother with 3 small children. Jax craned his neck, searching for a lone woman, someone who looked like she might be a Boston governess coming to marry a cowboy. The platform began to clear, and for a moment, Jax felt a cold wash of disappointment. Perhaps she'd changed her mind. Perhaps she'd gotten off at an earlier stop, taken one look at the vast emptiness of Texas and decided. Then she appeared at the train car door, and the entire platform fell silent. Eleanor Catherine Hartwell was not what anyone had expected. Later, trying to describe that moment, people would struggle for words, but the immediate impression was one of striking contrast. She was a Negro woman, her skin a rich mahogany that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. She wore a traveling suit of deep blue that was clearly well made but showed signs of a long journey, and a small hat perched atop intricately braided hair. Her face was beautiful in a way that commanded attention, high cheekbones and full lips, but it was her bearing that truly arrested everyone's gaze. She stood tall, shoulders back, her chin lifted with quiet dignity despite the sudden deafening silence that had fallen over the platform. Behind Jax, someone gasped. He heard Mrs. Henderson's shocked whisper, "She's colored." The word rippled through the crowd, disbelief mixing with scandal and barely concealed outrage. Jax stood frozen, not from prejudice or disappointment, but from sheer surprise. In all their letters, Eleanor had never mentioned her race. He'd assumed, wrongly as it turned out, that she was white like most Bostonians he'd heard about. The omission suddenly made sense, her careful wording in letters, her emphasis on practical partnership rather than romance, her insistence that she was tired of being treated as neither one thing nor another. Eleanor's dark eyes scanned the platform, taking in the shocked faces, the gaping mouths, the sudden hostile energy. Her expression remained calm, but Jax, watching carefully, saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her gloved hands gripped her travel bag a little tighter. She knew what she was walking into. She'd probably known all along, had probably experienced this exact reaction 1,000 times in different forms. Yet here she was, stepping down onto a hostile platform in a strange town, about to meet a man who might reject her on sight. Something shifted in Jackson Monroe in that moment. He thought about all the times he'd faced down opposition, everyone who'd told him a dusty cowpuncher could never build an empire, every banker who'd laughed at his dreams, every setback and obstacle he'd overcome through sheer stubborn determination. He thought about Eleanor's letters, the intelligence and humor and strength that had shown through every word. He thought about what courage it must have taken for her to make this journey, knowing the reception she might receive. And then Jackson Monroe did what he'd always done when faced with a challenge. He stepped forward. The crowd parted as he walked through them, his boots loud on the wooden platform. Eleanor saw him coming, and for the first time, her careful composure cracked slightly. Her eyes widened, a flash of fear and hope and desperate uncertainty crossing her face. She stood her ground, refusing to back away, but Jax could see her bracing for rejection. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the light sheen of perspiration on her forehead from the heat and the stress. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, this wealthy white rancher and this educated Negro woman, each taking the other's measure. Then Jack smiled, a genuine expression that lit up his usually serious face. He removed his hat with one hand and extended the other toward her. "Miss Hartwell, I presume?"
I'm Jackson Monroe.
"It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your letters didn't do you justice, ma'am." The platform erupted in shocked whispers, but Jax ignored them completely. His attention was entirely on Eleanor, who stared at his outstretched hand as if it were the most unexpected thing she'd ever seen. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. "Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice rich and cultured with that Boston accent he'd imagined from her letters. "I apologize for not being more forthcoming in my correspondence. You thought I might not give you a fair chance." Jax's smile turned into something harder, more determined. He raised his voice so it carried across the platform, addressing the gawking crowd as much as Eleanor. "Miss Hartwell, I built my ranch from nothing through hard work and refusing to let anyone tell me what I could or couldn't do. I don't particularly care what people think, and anyone who wants to stop doing business with me because of who I choose to marry probably wasn't worth doing business with in the first place. So yes, ma'am, if you're still willing, I'd be honored if you'd be my wife." Reverend Talbot, to his credit, stepped forward from the crowd. The elderly minister had seen enough in his years to know that courage came in many forms. "The church is ready whenever you are, Jax. Though I'd recommend giving the lady a chance to freshen up first. It's a long journey from Boston." Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy that transformed her face. "That would be most appreciated, Reverend. Though I should warn you both, I'm not sure I believe in long engagements." "Neither do I, ma'am," Jax agreed. He turned to the crowd, meeting every eye with a level gaze that dared anyone to object. "This is my fiancée, Miss Eleanor Hartwell. She's about to become Mrs. Monroe, and she'll be the mistress of the Triple M Ranch. I expect her to be treated with the same respect you'd show any other rancher's wife. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take it up with me personally." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, surprisingly, it was old Doc Morrison who broke it. The doctor walked forward, removed his hat, and extended his hand to Eleanor. "Welcome to Dusty Creek, Miss Hartwell. It's not often we get someone of obvious education and refinement in these parts. I hope you'll find our little town agreeable, despite the less agreeable attitudes some folks might display." His words broke the spell. Slowly, others came forward. Not everyone, and not with universal warmth, but enough to show that not every heart in Dusty Creek was closed by prejudice. Mrs. Chen from the Chinese laundry smiled broadly and welcomed Eleanor, no stranger herself to discrimination. Young Timothy Blake, who'd been raised by his grandmother to judge people by their deeds, eagerly offered to carry Eleanor's bags. Even Mrs. Henderson, after a moment of visible internal struggle, managed a stiff nod of acknowledgement. But there were also those who turned away, their faces hard with disapproval. Jax made note of each one, filing away the information for future reference. Let them show their true colors now, he thought. Better to know who your real friends are from the start. They married that very evening in a simple ceremony at the church. Eleanor wore the same blue traveling suit, though she'd managed to freshen up and change her hair into an elegant arrangement that made Jax's breath catch. The church was barely half full, many townspeople choosing to stay away rather than witness what they considered a scandal. But those who came did so with genuine good wishes, and Reverend Talbot performed the ceremony with as much dignity and joy as any wedding he'd ever conducted. When Jax kissed his bride, sealing their unusual union, Eleanor whispered against his lips, "Thank you for seeing me. The real me, not just what everyone expects." "Thank you for being brave enough to come," he whispered back. "I promise you, Eleanor Monroe, I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice." The early months were not easy. The newlyweds faced prejudice from some corners and curiosity from others. Several business associates initially refused to deal with Jax, though most came crawling back when they realized he truly didn't need them more than they needed him. Eleanor faced snubs from some of the townswomen, doors that closed in her face, whispered insults she pretended not to hear. But Eleanor Monroe proved to be exactly what Jax had hoped for, a true partner. She learned ranch management with the same determination she'd once applied to her studies, riding out with Jax to inspect cattle, helping with the books, and gradually transforming the ranch house into a true home. Her education and Boston refinement, combined with her practical intelligence, made her invaluable in ways Jax hadn't even anticipated. She started a school on the ranch for the workers' children, both white and Mexican, teaching them to read and write regardless of their backgrounds. She managed the household with an efficiency that impressed even the most skeptical ranch hands. More importantly, she and Jax developed a genuine partnership that grew into something deeper. They spent evenings on the porch discussing the day's events, planning for the future, sharing stories from their different worlds. Jax found himself falling in love with his mail-order bride, not despite their differences but because of the strength those differences had forged in both of them. A year later, when Eleanor gave birth to their first child, a beautiful daughter they named Hope, even the most resistant hearts in Dusty Creek began to soften. The little girl, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's golden-brown skin, became a symbol of possibility, of what could be built when people chose courage over fear, love over prejudice. The story of the rich cowboy who ordered a mail-order bride and married a Negro woman despite the scandal became legend throughout Texas. Some told it as a cautionary tale, others as an inspiration. But for Jax and Eleanor Monroe, it was simply their beginning, the start of a life built on honesty, respect, and the courage to choose love over convention. They proved that family isn't defined by what you look like or where you come from, but by the choices you make and the strength you show when the whole world is watching. And sometimes, the most speechless moments lead to the most powerful stories, the ones that change not just individual lives but entire communities, one brave choice at a time.